The year is 1992. I'm looking at a Washington Post headline. The headline reads, "Bush dumps quail." The story says, in spite of some ascending voter confidence, Mr. Bush has determined Mr. Quail is not going to be an appropriate running mate. He has chosen someone before the convention who can deliver at least 700,000 votes, mother of 4, grandmother of 8, extreme right-wing fanatic, but in Mr. Bush's view can bring to him what he feels he lost through some part of the early 90s, the religious right vote. I have a lady sitting opposite me. I'd like to ask that lady what she thinks about that news headline.
Well, you're making me laugh this early because that is probably one of the greatest scenarios I've ever heard. That is a fairy story.
Well, Beverly Lahaye of Concerned Women of America, you could deliver 700,000 votes. Now, you know you've got them in your hip pocket.
Well, Bob, there'd have to be some changes made before I would deliver that many votes to this administration.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't be just a shoo-in. There'd have to be some changes made. And I'm sure he would never consider me for that position. But just say, let's paint a scenario. Should he do so? I would have to have some agreements with the president what our expectations would be. Our 700,000 members out there would not fall right in step with this administration.
But they'd fall in step with you. I mean, you mean you're that far right?
We're so far right.
You're that far right. Maybe I should have read this headline from the Washington Times, and it would have said, "Good news for America." Beverly Lahaye is president and founder of Concerned Women for America, and you do have about 700,000 members and growing. I know you're chagrined that those loudmouths over at the National Organization for Women only have a couple of 100,000 women and get all the press. Although you get those little sidebars in USA Today once in a while. And spokespersons from your organization sometimes get the op-ed portion of the editorial page in USA Today. But you just don't get the front page like they do. Why not?
Well, I think it's quite well known that most of those in the major news media are really more in step with NOW than they would be with our organization. And so when an editor is looking for a story, they will be drawn to the side of the story. And, you know, they say, well, they do not discriminate, that they're not biased. But recently I read a 4-series article in the Los Angeles Times where the writer there, in great detail, expounded for 4 consecutive days on the bias of the media. Mm-hmm. And we're victims of that.
We did a show on that last week, by the way.
Called
it Abortion Bias, keying it off that article, and it was the first time I've ever seen that sort of thing documented.
Me too.
It's like the press reporting on the press.
Mm-hmm.
You are pretty far right, though. Even for mainstream evangelicalism, how have you managed to get all these women convinced that it ought to be a feminine agenda to get involved with the politics of Central America?
Well, that's a good question, because our women are basically of a Christian persuasion. Mm-hmm. And we found that we were always, NOW and NAREL and the rest of them always have us try to position us on the defensive. So we're against this, we're against abortion, we're against pornography, we're against everything. And pretty soon you realize that that is not our Christian principles. Mm-hmm. Our Christian principles are to reach out in love and compassion. And then when we were lobbying in Washington, D.C. on help for the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, I began to investigate and found out that these were people, many of them named the name of Jesus Christ. And these people were being persecuted, were being neglected, and they were fleeing their country, running into Costa Rica, and I found 300,000 refugees in Costa Rica, and no one was taking care of them. Well, I could not just walk away from it. And so we have established an organization called Amor a la Libertad, and we have 11 staff people in Costa Rica who are caring for the refugees. And it's a Christian compassion.
We'll get to some other things in a moment, but while we're on the subject of politics, I've got you in the hot seat here for a moment. I'd like to keep you grilling for a few seconds. Personally, I can't find anything in your agenda that basically I disagree with. I mean, I've looked through it, you know.
I mean, you're far right, too?
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing to me. There's a difference, though. You see, my concern is with the codifying of that agenda organizationally so that there can be an implicit assumption, whether you intend it or not, that to be a good Christian woman, you really have to be a WASP Republican. I mean, there is an implicit assumption that some people do get out of that. Certainly your opponents get that. Wouldn't there have been a way to do it without nailing it down so tightly?
You know, you're sounding like Phil Donahue. He posed the same question to me. And, you know, labels are so, they're so quick to put labels on us. But what we're trying to do is follow the biblical principles for family life, for morality, for marriage relationship, and so on. And if it falls into the category that fits into the Republican Party, that's not my choice. But may I say that we still do not fall right in step with the Republican Party. I'm still always trying to knock on their door to saying, your platform said this, but you're not doing this. You're doing something else. So we try to be bipartisan. We do have some Democrats in our organization, but as you can guess...
Who are Christians?
And they're Christians, that's right, but they're certainly not well accepted by the Democratic Party.
But the fact is, Beverly, that it is essentially a Republican-oriented, and I understand the realities, the political realities. It's like, who else is out there and what do we do? But you know, you've been on a roll for a number of years. There was the Reagan Revolution, and now the kinder and gentler America Bush. So what's going to happen if in the next election the Republicans lose and then the Christian right has identified itself with these people and suddenly it finds itself in a very adversarial position with the next administration, says, hey, okay, you marched to their tune for the last 12 years, but now you got to pay the piper.
Well, we're not in Washington only because we think that we've got the ear of the administration. We're there because we feel like we can be the watchdog, if I can use that word, and send out the word to our membership on what is really happening, what legislation is taking place. We're working with a friendly president, but we're not working with a friendly Congress. The majority of the Congress would not fall in step with us, and nor do we fall in step with them. So we're kind of used to that, the opposition that we're always hitting every day as we go up on the Hill to lobby.
Do you have something planned for the next midterm elections with regards to the issue within the Republican Party right now that's splitting it so badly, and that is the abortion stance, the kind of we say this, but we're going to do this, and the freedom that the Republican Party, Bush denies, but they in fact are allowing for candidates to oppose the party platform, etc. Are you going to, in some cases, actively oppose candidates who are not pro-life, who may be Republicans and agree with you and everything else?
Well, let me preface all that first by saying we cannot support or oppose candidates. We're a 501c3, but we can educate people and let them make their own decision. Yes, I've already had meetings with the top leaders in the RNC, Republican National Party, and they've asked would we waive our pro-life stance on certain party or certain candidates, and I have been quick to say to them that pro-life is one issue that we would die for. We will not compromise on it. And so I have been telling people, and they were agreement 100%, that they'll go to the polls and vote, but they're going to skip over those candidates who call themselves pro-choice and are Republicans. We're going to skip over those. We've got to send a message to them that we will not compromise on killing unborn babies.
A few years back, I can't say that you were a quiet, obscure preacher's wife, because even then you and your husband were writing books that were selling millions of copies, but you didn't have nearly the national profile now. Nor did you have the inequality in the marriage that put your name in the headlines above Tim's. That's quite a fast track you've been on over the last decade, and how has it affected your relationship with your family, your husband, and with other people that you have gone from co-author to superstar?
That's a good question, Bob, and we've been asked that before. What I'm doing today was not by my choice. I did not have a great desire to reach this level that I'm at and sit in Washington and lead a national organization. That wasn't my dream. When I started Concerned Women for America, I was sitting in San Diego. I was a pastor's wife. I was a mother, a grandmother, as you've already said, and I was concerned about what the feminists were doing to the women of America. And I found church women who had no idea what the Equal Rights Amendment stood for, ERA, what NOW stood for, or the other acronyms, and I decided one night just to pull together a meeting at the Civic Center in our neighborhood. I brought together some other women from various churches, and I said, let's have a meeting for the church women in our community, and let's bring in a speaker and educate them on the ERA. Fine. We did it. We had 1,200 people out that night. We filled the center, and when it was all over, the people said, oh, what are we going to do now? Now that we've got this information, we cannot just go back to our homes and do nothing. We've got to do something. And in a sense, that was the beginning seed of what Concerned Women for America used as a launching pad. I never dreamed it would go outside of my own county or my state, much less become a national organization. And yes, it has put me into a limelight, if I could say, sometimes a negative limelight, sometimes a positive. My husband is a man who is very supportive. I would have to have a husband who really was confident in his own right, and he is. He glories in any successes I have, and he sorrows at any bad mouthing or bashing I get. So he's very supportive. And the fact that, in fact, a minister asked him one not too long ago, said, Tim, how can you handle it? Your wife can go into a community and she can draw a bigger crowd in the auditorium than you draw. And Tim smiles, isn't that great? You know, he was just thrilled to death. So he is not threatened by it. If he were, to be honest, I'd have to quit doing what I'm doing because he is my top priority. But because he's so supportive and we agree on these issues, in fact, in a sense, he's been my mentor in the issues and really helping me focus on the issues. When I was busy raising little children at home, he was reading to me issues and we were discussing them at home together. And in a sense, I was in a training ground while my children were still very young. When they were grown and left the home, I was ready then to step out and start doing something like I'm doing now.
Well, you've been a Christian Woman of the Year, and the accolades, I mean, they just kind of go on and on and on. You've been everywhere, done everything, appeared on practically every form of the media there is. That's a pretty heavy responsibility. What trained you best for that? Was it the role of the pastor's wife? Was it living in the ecclesiastical fishbowl? Was it the books that you wrote, the articulation of a very precise viewpoint, knowing it could be criticized once in print. Was it getting through 4 kids and 8 grandchildren? What was it? And all the diapers in between. What was it that best prepared you for those types of things?
Well, I would say the children, the grandchildren had a great deal to do with it, but you and I have known each other for several years. Mm-hmm. I was rather a timid soul, and I was a person who did not project myself into the forefront. I would rather have been an observer, rather than a spectator in life, rather than a participant. Mm-hmm. But something happened. I think it was my concern over what was happening with the children and the families in America that I began to forget myself. I began to forget those areas that I'd always been quite timid about, and I decided that I would just step out. But you know, I'll be honest with you, when I've been on some of these talk shows and Phil Donahue and Oprah Winfrey and so on, I cannot say that I walked in there with all the confidence in the world, but I knew that God was going to put the words in my mouth to say at the right time.
Well, God put the words in my mouth at Phil Donahue's show, but he bleeped me, so maybe I'm the only religious leader that ever had a Phil Donahue show delayed for 3 weeks because they had to bleep out all the profanity. Well, I was debating Two Live Crew, and I requoted their lyrics, and Phil had to. Now you understand.
I was going to say, what were you saying?
You almost had a scandalous tale to tell. As I sit in front of you here at the microphone, it occurs to me that this is a rather interesting phenomenon. The fact that I am talking to you and that millions of people are going to be hearing us talk together really goes back to the late 1970s and something your husband did. It was your husband to whom I was introduced and with whom I had a casual conversation on the floor of a Christian booksellers convention, who took me by the arm, marched me across the convention hall over to a book publisher's booth and introduced me to the head of the company, and in so many words says, "Why are you not publishing this man's books?" That single act of graciousness on behalf of your husband was probably the key turning point in everything that's happened to me over the last dozen years.
Right.
Yeah. If I had not had that auspicious introduction, and if that publisher had not picked up my books, which then became bestsellers, I would have not gone on to write 5 other bestsellers. I would never probably have received the kind of notoriety that led to the opportunity I have through the talk show that I do now. And it seems kind of interesting to me that after that providential meeting with your husband and his very, very unselfish act of Christian kindness toward this punk little kid just peddling his books here and there wherever he could, I would not be here today talking to you and letting you have that voice to the public that listens to me. Now, my point is, there are just some really strange things sometimes that God does, and I really do fully credit your husband, Tim Lahaye, with my being here today to talk to you, and I'm grateful, and I tell, whether I've ever told you, I tell everybody everywhere I go that Tim Lahaye is the man who did the right thing at the right time so that I could be who I am now to be used by the Lord. I'd like to know if there was any particular, you mentioned the situation where you spoke to the 1,200 women. Was there any particular kind of turning point, any kind of something that somebody did or something that happened that kind of got you on this map with Concerned Women for America?
Yes, probably so, Bob, and it's very kind of you to say what you just said. I think one of Tim's great gifts is helping other people get started. And then he goes on to do something else, and they start doing their ministry, and I think, in a sense, that's what he did to me. I remember one night we were sitting in our living room, and we were watching the evening news. Betty Friedan was on the Barbara Walters show. And
I know who she is, but you better tell the people.
Betty Friedan, well, she's the mother of the feminist movement. Mm-hmm. She is one of the founders of NOW and has been around for leading the feminist movement for many, many years. Now she's stepped aside and others are carrying on, but she is the mother of the feminist movement. And she was being interviewed by Barbara Walters, and this was probably 11, 12 years ago. And Betty Friedan said, "I'm representing the women of America." So I sat up straight and wanted to hear what this lady who's representing me was going to be saying. And then she went on to expound her own philosophy, and I thought, wait a minute, that doesn't represent me, nor any of the other women that I know and I work with and I go to church with. That's not our viewpoint. That's not our philosophy of life. And then at the very end of the show, after she expounded all of her agenda for NOW, she said, "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life, Barbara, seeing that America becomes a humanist nation."
She used that term.
She used that term. And now my husband had already been talking in our home. We discussed secular humanism.
Well, your husband wrote the handbook on the subject to awaken the Christian community of the whole humanist issue, the battle for the mind.
Absolutely. And Tim says that when she said that, I jumped up off the sofa and I said, "And I will spend the rest of my life saying that America doesn't become a humanist nation." Now, that was quite aggressive for me to make such a statement. But I think right then Tim began to see that I had a fire burning within me, and Tim was going to keep that fire alive, which he did.
Beverly, some of my best friends are rather strange. I keep some odd company. I get a lot of criticism for it. I hang out with rock and roll bands. Son of the Penthouse Publisher is one of my best friends. My public knows that. I write for magazines that Christians use to wrap dead fish in. I do some strange things, and it's because I genuinely enjoy those opportunities to really hear what other people think. Not what I think they think, not what I've been told they think. I find that it keeps me more authentic as I shout across the chasm at them. Haven't you ever had the urge to just kind of hang out at a yogurt shop with Eleanor Schmiel and just talk, about life? Don't you have any feminist friends?
Well,
I could introduce you to some.
I do have some feminist acquaintances. Now, they don't regard me as a friend because I'm unmovable in my conviction.
Are you too doctrinaire to hang out with them?
No, I would sit and talk with them.
Do they think you're too much of a prude to hang out with them?
I hope not. I've spoken with Molly Yard. I've spoken with Eleanor Schmiel. But they get mad when they're around me. They get hostile when they're mad.
It's because you're prettier than they are. I think they're jealous.
I don't know about
Personally,
that.
I think I don't understand the feminist movement. They pick all the ugly women, and at least we picked a lovely, attractive woman. I mean, they pick all these ugly women. I don't understand. It's poor marketing on their part. They really, you can quote me.
Well, but you see, if the thing is, when I'm with them and we talk, I have to speak what's on my heart. I have to say truth. I do not change my convictions just to kind of go along with them. And I did that with Eleanor Schmiel. We were on a talk show, and we were talking about the family, and I said some very strong things that I feel very deeply about, and she got really upset with me. And so when we broke for our commercial, she thought the mics were dead, but they were not. And so on national radio, she came off, I don't know, you might want to bleep this out, but she says, "That damn woman." I mean, that's her attitude toward me. that she just has nothing in common. So she,
Well, how do you know what the other side thinks? I mean, don't you ever get an opportunity?
I read their literature. I
But
read
you don't
their
talk, you don't ever
writings.
get a chance to talk to them. You can't get that close to
Not
them.
a great deal. We do talk to people on the Hill who would fall in step with that, and I can talk with them. But when you're talking about the key leaders of the feminist movement, they kind of isolate themselves away from sitting down and having a cup of coffee
There's
with
nothing
Beverly
there's
Lahaye.
nothing you can agree with them on.
Oh, I can't say nothing. No.
What would it be?
Well, right this moment, I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm thinking. I can't think of
Well,
it.
I've got your concerns and your goals. I've got your whole agenda in front of me, and I can't find anything here that would fit into this. Why do you have to get involved in issues that are, here we go back to politics again, so distinctively politicized, like the defense system of America? Now, I don't want to sound like a liberal here, because I am for a strong defense system. I mean, I agree with you, but I'm speaking for Bob Larson, talk show host. I'm offering a personal opinion. I'm saying, hey, I think we ought to have the strongest military in the world so that nobody intrudes in our territory and we can be the champions for freedom. And that's private citizen Bob Larson. I may have, millions of people listening to me, but now you are the official leader of an organization with a high political profile. When you say that, it's different.
But Bob, it's wrong to think that the mothers of America are not concerned about the security of America. It's the mothers of America who send their boys to war. They get their boys ready to go off to the military, or they see the threatening cause of communism in the years past. Praise God, today it's a little changing, but so our women were concerned about the protection of our country, and SDI was going to be that protection.
Well, that's my next question. Okay, it's one thing to say, hey, let's keep America strong so our boys don't die in a foreign battlefield. But then you not only do that, but you get very narrowly defined in the political perspective representing the Christian women of America, like the Strategic Defense Initiative. I mean, you get real specific about it. Now, are you not dragging these women into an area of the political arena that's debatable among even your good fellow Republicans of like mind?
No, I don't believe so, because what I have done is I've given them briefings. I've given them seminars and workshops and let them make up their own mind. And they will give a standing ovation to someone from Washington, D.C., who is very knowledgeable on the issue, who will speak about the SDI being a protection for us, and they'll give him a standing ovation. I didn't convince them, but they've heard the facts, and that's the key. Our women are interested in hearing the facts.
But they've heard the facts as presented from a prejudiced perspective.
But the facts are very openly presented on the newscast. You can turn on the morning news programs, and you'll hear the other side given often. You don't very often hear the side for supporting SDI, and that's what I tried to balance for them.
So you find no problem with
I
the
have no problem with
specificity
that
of the
at all.
political agenda?
No, they make up their own decision. I can't say that 100% of them would agree with that, but when I do a mailing on SDI, the response is overwhelming.
Why do I keep getting direct mail invitations to join the Concerned Women for America?
Oh, because we like men.
Well, I'm sure you do. I mean, you're very bright women, but I can join?
We have over 100,000 men who are members of Concerned Women for America. Now, these are men who know who they are. They're not threatened by their...
These are not fundamentalist wimps.
No, they're not wimps at all. These are men who fully understand that they're every bit male, but they support what we stand for. And since they don't see a men's organization out there with this kind of a platform, they will join with us. And they're very supportive.
This is the end of Side 1. Please turn the cassette over at this point for the continuation of the message on Side 2.
When Jerry Falwell folded the moral majority, you're human. Even Beverly Hay is carnal sometimes. Surely you must have thought to yourself, Boy, what a window of opportunity for Concerned Women for America, because that competition is gone. Didn't you ever have a carnal moment when a thought crossed your mind?
No, don't you put words in my mouth. Let me tell you what I thought. And I don't want to sound like I'm real pious either, but in Washington, D.C., I sit out there almost like a lone voice sometimes. And when we had the moral majority there in an office just a few blocks away, I felt that we had a team player who could go to these meetings and would join with us, and I had support. When they walked out and they shut down their offices and they went back to Lynchburg, I felt, oh my goodness, we're going to be even more alone now. And so it was kind of a shock to me that he was folding the tents, and we wouldn't have that kind of support.
Well, you really are. I was going to use a very sexist term. I'm going to say you are really the political point man for the politicized evangelical community. Well, chauvinist terms aside, there really it was a vacuum. I mean, you really are kind of it now. Don't you find this is awfully ironic that you could not pastor 95% of the churches that the women in your organization attend, couldn't even serve on the deacon boards of half of them, and yet you're leading them in this war to restore America to whatever?
Oh, but I'm not teaching them biblical doctrine, or I'm not leading them in their spiritual lives. I'm talking about the traditional values of America that their churches should be supporting, and together, really. I find myself in a situation where I could really benefit the whole church program if let the pastors see me as a friend, just alerting them and keeping them in tune with what's happening in Washington. I'm not there to teach biblical doctrine and try to lead their and become ordained. I have no desire to ever be an ordained minister.
Do you have an Esther complex?
Let me say
that's a serious question. I don't mean it to be humorous. Is it for such a time as this that you are where you are?
Well, if that's what God has me there for, I have an Esther complex, I guess.
Why you, Beverly? Why not a man? Why not a man?
Well, I'd like to know, too. I'm going to ask
Were
the
there
Lord
no good men? Can we not find any few good men anymore?
But you see, when you're talking about abortion,
yeah,
I think it takes a woman to talk about abortion, even though I think it's a family issue. But when you're talking toe-to-toe with the feminist, and I stood outside the Supreme Court the day the Webster decision came down from the Supreme Court, Molly Yard was right there. And it was woman to woman that we were battling. It was not man to woman. This was an issue of life, an unborn baby's life. So I think it takes women to lead that fight. I really do. Even though I'm thrilled that there are men in the battle with us who are speaking up. But when the rubber meets the road and the women keep saying we want pro-choice, well, they don't want to hear a man saying the choices are not yours. They want to hear what is a woman going to say, and that's where the real issue is.
So, because one of, if not the pivotal moral/political issue of the hour is abortion.
Absolutely.
Then that makes it quite natural that the female leadership of an organization of this caliber would be critical.
I believe that, yes.
What's going on? Is this going to be the decade of the woman? We got Chamorro, and we've got a number of other countries right now, Pakistan, et cetera, that are headed by women. In traditionally macho societies, I mean, let's face it, Latin America, you talk about keeping them pregnant and barefoot. My goodness. Is something happening to us in America, too? I mean, I know I was kidding you about that headline a little earlier, but are we really looking toward the day of truly a female vice president or president?
I don't think it's on the immediate horizon, not yet. I think the feminist women have done too much damage to America to open the doors to have a president as a woman, or even as a vice president.
Wait. Excuse me, Beverly. You're blaming the feminists? Most people would blame you for your biblically submissive attitude as being in the road. What did the feminists do?
Oh, the feminists have led the way on many issues that have torn the family apart. You know, the whole issue of abortion, for one thing, and parental notification. Most parents want to be notified if their children or their daughter is going to get an abortion. The feminist women will stand up in Washington, D.C. and shake their fists and say, give the child that freedom. The parents don't have the right to be controlling it. So I'll go back again and I'll repeat it. The feminist women have done a lot of damage to our country, and I don't think America's ready yet to put a woman in that position of leadership. But now let's talk about Violetta Chamorro. I've visited with her on 2 occasions. I found her to be a great woman, and the people...
Excuse me, for the people who don't know, this is the newly elected leader of Nicaragua.
Yes, and the people of Nicaragua love her. Oh, they love her, not the Sandinistas. I'm talking about the people of Nicaragua. The average...
Voted for.
Oh, yes, and when I went down there and we mingled with the people and we spoke with them, and they would lay down their lives for Violetta Chamorro because they see her as their pathway to freedom, and she loves them. And right now, you know, they're going through all sorts of turmoil and problems, and I see her sitting out there almost alone. America has done nothing to really help her in this critical position. To take over a country and that is worse than bankrupt. It is desperate, destitute. And they have pleaded for Americans to come down and try to help them. But I see this woman trying to bring back some stability to a country, give hope to her people, and she has nothing to give hope with.
You have to live in a real fishbowl now. I mean, if being a pastor's wife was a fishbowl, this is an aquarium, isn't it? Well, don't you? You know, every time I've ever seen you, you're beautifully coiffured. You have not a hair out of place. You're always immaculate, always tastefully dressed. Don't you ever worry sometime that you're going to be in a bikini in a beach in Bimini, and some paparazzi is going to have some telephoto lens, and he's going to take a shot of you, and it's the whole thing's going to go down the tubes?
That would really be desperate if they found me in a bikini.
Well, just a plain old bathing suit. I mean,
well, you
it
know
would
what?
destroy the image, you know.
Hey, I try to let people know I'm human.
You're not that human.
Well, hey, I take a vacation with my family, and we go to the lake with our grandkids, and we live in swimsuits.
You
and
get your hair wet?
Get my hair wet, and when I went down to Costa Rica and I work with the refugees, I get caught in torrential jungle rainstorms where you look very natural, and you know there's no curl left, and you're dripping wet. But my heart stays the same. My physical appearance might change. You see, I'm not interested in people accepting me because of my physical appearance. They've got to know my heart.
Yeah, but you do fit the image well.
No, I do try to keep
you
myself.
Dress nicely, you're lovely, you're attractive, you're this nice, quiet, articulate, spoken Christian woman. I mean, you really do fit. You're perfect for the image. If I was a marketing consultant, I would have picked you.
Well, thank you.
I would have picked you. You're perfect for the image. But what is the image supposed to be? Is there not something inherent in what we think the perfect Christian woman ought to look like?
You know, I was in Fresno, California not too long ago. The temperature that day was 110 degrees. I was not feeling well. It was one of my down days. I looked bad. My hair wasn't curled as nicely as you think it always is. And I had on clothes that were a bit wrinkled. The heat was intense. And I was waiting for my husband to get something repaired on the car. And I was a typical American woman. And I was sitting over in a corner waiting for Tim, and I almost fell asleep there. I was so hot. And a lady came over to me and she said, "Do I see Concerned Women for America sitting?" And I thought, oh my gosh. And I looked up and I stood up and I shook her hand and I said, "And what is your name?" And she gave it to me and I said, "I'm Beverly." And she said, "Well, I know you're Beverly." She says, "You're just not like what I had pictured." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry," but I said, "I have up days and I have down days." She says, "Well, I'm your new prayer chapter leader for the Fresno area." And she says, I'm so thrilled to see that you're just a normal, common American woman. And that's what I am.
Listening to me is mostly a non-Christian audience, and there are thousands of women right now who tune into me because it's fun, because it's entertainment, because it's controversial, because it's whatever, and they're for the first time hearing about Concerned Women for America and say, what is this all about? Anyway, I never heard of this. Why should these women, who may or may not share all of your concerns, why should they right now want to join your organization? What would compel them to join forces with you?
Good question, Bob. Because we are the only women's organization that I know of that's at the national level who is concerned about their children. Concerned to the effect that we're investigating why their children are not being taught to read and write in school. We're investigating why there's so much increase in teenage pregnancy, why young people today, children today, are tampering with drugs and alcohol. We are concerned, and we're doing something about it. So the mom listening to you, and the parents listening to your program, who don't know what to do with their kids, and they think there's no hope left. We are an organization that's trying to help them find out what they can do to help their children. We have named this decade, the years of the 90s, the decade of destiny for America's children. We feel in this 10 years is going to be the most critical period in our American history regarding the children, teenagers. And so the person listening to you who has a family can know that we're their friend, and we're trying to find out how they can get help to improve their family and to protect their children from some of these undermining things that are destroying their children's lives.
I want to go down through the agenda of the Concerned Women for America in just a moment. However, in so much as you have a new book by the same publisher who's published my last 3 books, I'd be in real trouble if I didn't ask you about a new book that you have. But what I want to ask you is, you've written a book about prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you are trying to broad base your organization, I would presume from a marketing standpoint that would be a deep concern to appeal to a very large spectrum. We talked about politicizing it. Now you're theologizing it. Aren't you getting terribly specific about a spiritual issue for a broad-based women's movement by writing a book about prayer?
I think the book on prayer came out of the heart that I have of concern for the children, for families, because the situation is getting worse. It's not getting better. We've been doing this now for 11 years, almost 12 years, and it's worse today than it was 12 years ago. And we can work as hard as we can, lobby, we can go to court and have litigation, but unless we look to a higher power, God, we're not going to have any success.
Do you have Jews in your organization?
We do have some, yes.
Mm-hmm. Any non-Christian religions represented?
We do, yes, we do. And we have some churches that probably the mainstream churches wouldn't even call Christian, but they're concerned about their families. They hit up against a brick wall, and they don't know what to do. And so this book on prayer, it's called Prayer, God's Comfort for Today's Families, is coming out of the experiences I've had with families, people who write to me, who may or may not be Christian, but they are desperate for answers. They've got a teenage girl who's come home pregnant, or a kid who's got AIDS or whatever it is, and they are desperate for answers. And this book is trying to help those families.
So that the people understand what Concerned America, Women for America is all about. I want to go down just quickly here before we close on some aspects of your agenda, because we've kind of talked around all of this, and it occurs to me that there's so many people who do not know your organization and what it stands for. They may have gotten some hints from it here, so I'm going to give you some quickies here and get some quick reactions from you. Deprivation of freedom and human rights. Everybody is for human rights. Can you be more specific what your problem is?
Well, that was really came out of the human rights offenses going on in Central America. And we put that in there because it wasn't just Nicaragua. It could be El Salvador. It could be across the Pacific. But so we made it a general statement that we really wanted to uphold the human rights of individuals.
Even if it's a right-wing nation?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Well, you say that, but just like the people on the other side would not be as quick to criticize, would be quick to criticize a right-wing government, not a left-wing government. Don't you think you'd lean the other way?
Well, we have had examples of where we've worked on both sides.
Give me one. Can you give me an example of a human rights abuse that you've criticized from a rightist regime?
From the rightist regime?
Yeah, from a rightist regime. And that's kind of putting you on the spot to go down and think of all these countries. But has there ever been a case where you've criticized that? A Chile, a Paraguay, a whatever?
We have not specifically been involved in those countries that you're mentioning. Now, we have been involved in El Salvador, but that actually turned around to where we support the Christiani government, which is the president of El Salvador. We've been down there and I've met with him. I've met with his cabinet. And then when the story of Jennifer Casolo, the missionary girl who was arrested and was then sent out of El Salvador. She was an American. We followed that and we sent out the documented evidence of who she really was. Well, she was a supporter of the FMLN, which is a pro-Sandinista, pro-terrorist, working against this right-wing government, which was the Christiani government. On the other side of the coin, for several years, we've been very involved with the Soviets who have imprisoned Christians. And we exposed them by printing the names of Christians who were imprisoned only because of their faith in Jesus Christ and were being tortured or persecuted, their human rights offended. And we have written letters, and we have seen several of those people be released from prison.
One of the things I think I have appreciated most about your organization is its active involvement in the economic support of legal action and supporting the legal defense team to get involved in some very prominent cases, some of which we have showcased on our broadcast, like the Brian Beatty case and others. It's not just all talk with you. You do put your money where your mouth is, and legal teams do get involved in going to bat for people who might not have defenses otherwise. The Brian Beatty case is the situation of the Christian mother, the young man whose father was a homosexual and in custody of him. What are some of the other notable cases you've been involved in?
Well, we've had many equal access cases. We have 5 attorneys on staff, and most recently, we're swamped with equal access cases, even though the Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot discriminate against a group using the facilities because they're going to pray or they're going to talk about Jesus Christ. You cannot discriminate. There has to be equal access, and in the last month, we've had 4 decisions come down through the court. We have won 3 of them, and one we lost, but it is going to be appealed because the Supreme Court has ruled that you've got to treat all people fairly. We're thankful for that. That's been a great help to us. We, down in Tennessee several years ago, I guess it's been about 3 years ago now, we had that Tennessee textbook case, as you're familiar with, where 7 families were offended because the textbooks were opposing what they teach their kids at home, the traditional values, and it was really teaching them witchcraft and occult and so on. And these families said, I don't want my children reading this book. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, the children were expelled from school. One mother was thrown in jail, and we took the case and went to court. And sad to say, we gave it everything we had. We fought it in the court for over 2 years, and we lost.
I know. We've already touched on the military and the rights of the unborn and so on. One of the areas that interests me, and again, here we have a lot of specificity, and that's fiscal responsibility on behalf of the government. Now, I can almost figure out in my mind what you're going to say as to why women should support that. But, sure, fiscal responsibility is important, but what's that got to do with a Christian women's organization?
Well, the economy has forced some of our women to leave home and go into the workplace who really wanted to stay at home and raise their children. So they feel like they're being deprived the opportunity once in a lifetime to raise little Johnny while he's 7, 10 years old and let them be with him, where the economy is so escalated that now they've got to get out of the home and go to work just to keep bread on the table. And so little Johnny goes without a mom at home. And so our women really feel like the government should put more guidelines and restrictions on our budget control. We're very much in favor of getting the budget back to a balanced budget, so families aren't persecuted. Now, another thing is we got very involved in raising the tax credit for families. We supported the $2,000 tax credit per child. That helps the family so much. That figure had not been raised in so many years that families were really being harmed by not increasing their tax credit per children. So children were becoming more of a financial burden than they were an asset to the family. So we do support the economic control.
In a couple of minutes, this will all be over with and you're going to walk out of here. What are you going to say about our time together this morning? What's your first reaction? What are you going to say when you walk out of the room that I wouldn't have known you'd said?
Well, I've enjoyed this very much. You've really stimulated my thinking. You've approached it from a little different angle than I never thought that you'd enter the program putting me as the vice president. So you caught me off guard on that one. But I've enjoyed it. I do enjoy doing interviews very much.
Well, don't you really kind of sometimes get tired of it? I mean, it isn't kind of like, okay, press secretary, how many do I have this morning? Oh, no, do I have to talk to them? And I don't want to really talk to them. Can you find an excuse to get me out of that? I mean, don't you have days like that?
Well, yes, some days I've got too much work to put into the hours that are available. So I'd like to cut off some of the interviews and not do. There are some days where I have too many to do that it's almost like spinning your wheels. But if I can do a program where I feel I can communicate honestly without somebody trying to box me in, but let me say what's on my heart, and you've allowed me to do that, and I really appreciate it.
I haven't been that tough on you?
No.
No? Gee, I'm disappointed in myself. Beverly, you wrote a 1.5 million copy bestseller called The Act of Marriage with your husband. That still continues to be a bestseller. It's about sex. You don't want sex education in the schools, but you wrote a book about sex. What do you want?
Regarding sex?
Yeah, what do you want regarding sex? I mean, how are you going to solve the problem? It's not getting solved. I mean, we know the government's not solving it. We all know the statistics of illegitimacy and the incidence of venereal disease. We got 2.5 million kids every year getting a new case of sexually transmitted diseases, 1 million illegitimate pregnancies, 400,000 teenage abortions. I mean, it's not getting any better. The secular community isn't solving it, and I know you helped a lot of people with the book you wrote, but all the haranguing that the church has done about morality, and even good books like yours with a positive, wholesome attitude towards sexuality, doesn't seem to have made a serious dent in it, though I'm sure it's helped many people personally. I mean, what are we going to do? The war is continually being lost, and neither side seems to have anything on its agenda that's going to solve it. So what are you going to do about it?
Well, first of all, that book was written for married people or people about to be married. It was not written for the teenagers to compete with the public schools teaching on sex, not at all, because it's very explicit. And we wrote that because we found in our counseling many married people were having problems with the subject of sex, all sorts of problems, and I won't even go into the variety of them. And so the publisher said, will you please write a book for married people to help in all these areas of counseling? And so we kept a file on all the people we'd counseled in this area, the kinds of questions they asked, the kind of problems they had. And this is how the book was born, really, from our counseling room. Before Concerned Women for America started, I was a participant with my husband in doing a lot of counseling. And so this book was born out of that, God endorses sex. God's the one who invented sex for us. But it was meant for married people. It was never meant for children. It was never meant for unmarried teenagers. It was never meant for singles. God specifically said this is for married people. So that's what we tried to teach in that book, and sex could be a beautiful part. Women who went into a marriage with a very puritanical idea were hurting a marriage relationship. And that book tried to communicate that. Now, as far as sex in general, our society is in a mess because we've let down all the barriers. We have no safe guidelines. Now with the subject of AIDS coming along, I think there's been a little bit more of drawing in because people say, well, if you're too promiscuous, you could come up with AIDS, or if you don't have safe sex methods, you could end up with AIDS. And I don't know why, and now I'll be quick to ask the Lord this one day, why AIDS came into our society like this, and it's killing innocent people. If people go into a lifestyle knowing full well that they have a good chance of getting AIDS, that's one thing. But when it takes the lives of innocent people, and I see in Washington, we have a whole ward of babies who are born into this world already with AIDS. That is devastating. We have got to do something about it. And the whole sexual promiscuity, I think, has just thrown this boiling pot into a turmoil, and I don't know what the answer is.
You'd get my vote. I think you're smarter than most of the men out there. I think you're smarter than most of the men we got in political office. I'd vote for you.
Well, thank you very much.
But not for vice president. I want you for president. Not for vice president.
I'll
I
let you know if I
will vote
decide
for you
to
for
run.
president. Beverly Lahaye, thank you very much for being with me today. Any final word?
No, but just keep doing what you're doing, Bob. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much.
This is the end of the message. For further information regarding other topics available on cassette and in printed form, write Compassion Connection, Box 36C, Denver, Colorado, 80236.